Okay, we're going to start. I got to say, it's been a lot of fun. I made new friends and seen old friends here. So it's been terrific for me, and I hope you feel the same way. Welcome to the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Boston Medical Library, 1875. Amazing. I'm Deeb Salem, and I'm charged with the event planning and moderating the program that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. And I'm thanking the board members who are helping in the planning process. And I don't know who pushed the lead. Which forwards the slide? Which one pushes this? Okay. So this is in the recognition of the people that were involved, and I think we should be proud of the results here. Dr. Pieters is, to me, an amazing person. He's done a lot to keep our program strong. And the BML's, he is the 22nd president of this organization, and he will give a brief introduction as the #1 event. Our new leader in terms of being the executive librarian Beth Kilmarx will be speaking. And the third part of our triple header is someone I've just enjoyed speaking to, Dr. Andrew Lamb, and he will be giving the final talk. So Dr. Pieters is going to start off by discussing the BML. Okay.
Thank you, Deeb. The late historian David McCullough, in his 2011 book, The Greater Journey, Americans in Paris, has a chapter called The Medicals. In it, he chronicles the experiences of a small group of young physicians who braved a trip across the Atlantic in the early 1930s to pursue postgraduate medical training in Paris's grand hospitals. The story sheds light on the people and events that shaped the lives of two of these students, Henry Ingersoll Bowditch and Oliver Wendell Holmes, who went on to establish the Boston Medical Library. The impetus for their journey was Paris's relatively new public medical school, L'École de Médecine, with 5,000 students, a faculty of 26 physicians, and a library of 30,000 volumes. There was no school like this in America. Of all the celebrated medical personalities that they met, they were most profoundly influenced by, what did I just do? Dr. Pierre Louis, a soft-spoken, unassuming man who insisted upon detailed history-taking, exact observation, and the need for careful clinical analysis based on evidence and on facts. Louis' numerical method for collecting and analyzing clinical data became the forerunner of modern-day epidemiology and of clinical trials. Holmes stated, Louis taught him the love of truth. This deep respect for evidence-based medicine followed Holmes and Bowditch back to Boston and informed their practice, research, and teaching for the duration of their careers. They promulgated Dr. Louis' research on the detrimental effects of the centuries-old practice of bloodletting that led to its almost complete disappearance by the 1890s. Among his many accomplishments, in 1843, Holmes demonstrated that washing hands before a delivery dramatically decreased the risk of a fatal postpartum infection. Bowditch pursued a career in pulmonary medicine and taught medical students the diagnostic power of using a stethoscope, a skill he had learned from Dr. Louis. Bowditch became a staunch advocate of public health and the first commissioner of public health in the Commonwealth. With the help of James Chadwick, a young rising star in gynecology, they opened the doors of the BML in 1875. Chadwick carried his want book everywhere to make sure that the BML's journal collection was as complete as possible. The BML has carried on with its pursuit of the truth and the tradition of evidence-based medicine for the past 150 years. Its commitment to providing access to current medical literature for practicing physicians and dentists is in our mission statement. Is in our mission statement to be a library for the dissemination of medical knowledge, the promotion of medical education and scholarship, and the preservation and celebration of medical history, and thereby to improve the quality of health and healthcare of the people. The Boston Medical Library has attracted the support of leaders of Massachusetts medical community throughout its history, and the tradition continues. Recently, two of our trustees, both major contributors to medical excellence in the Commonwealth for decades, have been honored. A building at Tufts Medical Center was named in honor of Dr. Deeb Salem, and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Jamaica Plain campus was named in honor of Dr. Al Di Maria. Thanks to the BML's relationship with UMass Chan Medical School and its Lamar Suter Library, library services are now available for BML fellows and MMS members. Unfortunately, we are increasingly living in a world of haves and have-nots. While trainees and faculty with academic appointments have digital access to an online library, those without academic appointments do not. Providing access to current medical literature is a critical component of our mission. For directions on how to access this service, please go to our website, bml.org. The Boston Medical Library has an illustrious history and many stories to tell through its collections and artifacts, which we hope to bring to you in the coming years. Please consider becoming a BML Fellow and supporting our mission. Thank you.
Interesting what your kids say after a building is named after you. They came to me and they said, "Dad, you're not dead yet." So I am still alive. Next, I am very pleased to introduce Beth Kilmarx, our BML Library Director. Beth is our first director in 65 years. We are very happy to have her. She joins us from Texas A&M, where she was assistant university lab librarian for the special collections and has been incredibly busy right since she joined us in June. Beth?
Okay, thank you very much, Deeb, for that lovely introduction. Good evening to you all, and welcome to the 150th anniversary celebration of the Boston Medical Library. I'm honored to serve not only as the first executive library director of this esteemed library, but also as its first librarian in over 60 years. And that I join its selective ranks of illustrious directors and librarians. And now, given this library's rich heritage, its mission, its contribution to the medical profession, I am more determined than ever that the BML will celebrate not only its bicentennial, but also its tricentennial, and perhaps even beyond. Now, contrary to popular belief, libraries are not static institutions. They are viable institutions that are in a constant state of change, punctuated with periods of equilibrium. And as you can easily read and see from this slide and the next, that the history of the Boston Medical Library exemplifies this pattern of change and punctuated equilibrium through its transitions and transformations over the last 150 years in terms of its locations, its librarians, and its collections. Now, the BML was officially founded in 1875 when three Bostonian organizations, the Society for Medical Observation, the Society for Medical Improvement, and the Boston Public Library combined their materials to form the foundational collection of the Boston Medical Library. This library is then incorporated as an independent institution with Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes serving as its first president and Dr. James Reed Chadwick, a physician who saw the way and served as its first librarian. And in the decades that followed, the BML provides services to the students and to the faculty from Boston's three leading medical and dental schools, namely Tufts University, Boston University, and Harvard University, with faculty and alumni of all three schools who are often fellows and who were involved in the leadership of the BML. And after the founding of the then UMass Medical School in the early 1970s, its faculty also too became involved in the development of the library. So in the first century of the BML, it experienced a period of growth, financial support, and transformation as it established new quarters around Boston, first at 19 Hamilton Place in 1875 during its inaugural year, and then 3 years later at 5 Boylston Street in 1875. And as its collections grew, perhaps exponentially, the BML 5 years. But in the 1960s, change once again happened, and the BML entered into a partnership with the Harvard Medical Library and transitioned to form the Countway Library. And although this partnership was dissolved after 60 years, the Boston Medical Library found itself transforming once again and reverting back into a standalone library. And after 3 years of planning, this past September, the BML moved into its newly renovated office suite in Westboro, and it set the foundation for its future. And now the team staffing the library plays a key role in the functioning and also the future of the BML. In addition to myself, Noelle Stockwell is a full-time employee and serves as a curator of medical collections. Assisting the BML with its collections for the last 3 years has been the Museum and Collections Resource, a consulting firm led by Valerie Kincaid and her specialist, Cassie Anderson, who is here also this evening, an archivist and project manager, and Grant Wood, a consulting collections manager. And additionally, there is Paul Cando-Romain, an independent researcher and rare books and manuscript specialist. And this is a highly skilled team with decades of experience and who, as the stewards of this renowned collection of medical documentary and cultural heritage materials, understands and accepts their ethical responsibility to secure, to preserve, and to protect the materials in their care and to make them discoverable and accessible to library fellows and to researchers. Now, the Boston Medical Library has transformed itself not only into a standalone library, but one that is unique There's a unique hybrid library with remotely housed collections with a staff who provide traditional library services while providing progressive assistance with offsite services through our partnership with Suter Library at UMass Chan. As the BML continues its transformation, work has begun to reestablish the BML identity. It is a name, it is a brand that is still universally recognized in the library world, the medical profession, and in the rare book trade. And we need to demonstrate and so where to begin? And for the first step in a reestablished desktop lists and files to those having an online presence in which materials are accessible and discoverable to researchers. And we will start by organizing and cataloging libraries' distinctive types of collections and formats, which range from 18th and 19th century oil portraits of very stern Bostonian physicians to 17th century gold royal touch pieces to rare books such as the Nuremberg Chronicle. And I have to say, when I saw that the Boston Medical Library had a Nuremberg Chronicle, I knew that I had hit the jackpot with this job. And to Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes's professional library. And we will utilize 5 international, national, and local online databases. These are the primo databases we are going to be playing at the top of the game here. And the first is the OCLC WorldCat database, which will host the bibliographic records of the books and serials. The second is Archive Space, the a database to manage the archival and manuscript collections. The third is Past Perfect, a museum system designed for artifacts and it hosts a digitized collection of BML materials. And the fifth will be the materials evidence in incunabula database hosted by the Consortium for European Research Libraries. And next, as we reestablish the BLM's identity, we will continue to engage in outreach activities and to provide the annual Garland and Estes lecture series and to engage in events such as this. These lecture series are highly regarded and have come to represent the BML at its best, and they serve activities by developing programs with its partners that will incorporate the BML's collections into their humanities curriculum. And we are in the early planning stages with one faculty member at UMass Chan to develop such a seminar. And if this proposal is successful, it is hoped to expand such programming to the other medical schools. Additionally, the BML will continue to seek opportunities to promote the library and to develop new partnerships. And thus far, the library has recently joined several professional organizations, including the Consortium of European Research Libraries in the Medical Library Association, and LAMPS. And as research outreach works both ways, the word is out that I am now at the Boston Medical Library, that the library is a viable, functioning institution. And will be spending this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, at the Boston Antiquarian Book Fair, where I have appointments set up with at least 5 book dealers, or I should say booksellers, and that who are interested in showing me their wares and perhaps helping the Boston Medical Library rebuild its collections. And finally, as we live in a virtual world, the first place people turn to is the web for information. And as a result, work has begun on revamping the library's website to make it more informative, easier to navigate, link collections to other resources and to social media platforms such as Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. And all this is done to advance the transformation of the Boston Medical Library. So in closing, these are truly exciting times for the Boston Medical Library. It has had an impressive 150 years, and the library team that is in place is dedicated to preserving its legacy and supporting its mission. And so here, if I had my champagne glass, I would say here's to another impressive 150 years of the Boston Medical Library.
Well, I think we're in good hands. Thank you. Uh, Finally, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Lamb, who I actually had a very nice conversation with earlier, who is assistant professor at UMass Chan Medical School. He is a retinal surgeon practicing in Springfield. He has authored many papers and co-authored many papers and 5 books, pretty good, including a book that's well known, Masters of Medicine, Our Greatest Triumphs in the Race to Cure Humanity's Deadliest Diseases. I think that itself is a great topic. The topic today is the only winner in war is medicine. I'm totally wondering what the heck that's about, but I'm sure we're going to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me, and thank you all for coming out on this dark night. I am very honored to be here. I congratulate the library on their incredible anniversary. It's really a special thing, and as someone who loves history, as I know everyone in this room does, that's a really wonderful thing to be a part of and to perpetuate. You know, as was mentioned, I am a retina surgeon, which means I spend most of my time trying to save sight from bad problems like retinal detachments or macular holes or diabetic retinopathy or macular degeneration. But most people who know me well know my true love is history. I'm sure there's many history buffs in this room as well. And today is great because I get to talk to you about the intersection of 2 of my favorite things, which is medical history and World War II history. You know, I went to college and I studied military history. That was what I was most passionate about. And I did think about going to grad school in history, but my dad was a cardiologist, and I grew up seeing how fulfilling being a physician could be. So I went to medical school and I did that. But I never lost this love of history. And I thought I'd give you guys maybe 5 minutes of explaining exactly how I turned from surgeon to writer. Basically, I remember the moments when I thought, wow, maybe I could actually write a book. And it was late at night in Philadelphia in the emergency room. It was 2 a.m. and it was very tired. I was very tired. And the steady flow of patients had finally kind of slowed down. And I had a thought that has never been thought in any emergency room in the world. I thought, it's such a pity I can't share everything I know about World War II in China with people. That has never been thought in an emergency room in the history. And I've met some emergency room physicians here tonight, and I'm sure that they won't disagree with me. You see, I had studied that in college to a very deep level. I had been fascinated by what Americans were doing in China. It was kind of like the unmined aspect of World War II to me. A lot of people knew a lot about the Pacific theater, the European theater, but a lot of Americans went to serve in China. They were importantly trying to make sure China did not capitulate and give up, because the ramification of that would be very severe, because Japan had hundreds of thousands of soldiers occupying China. And if China capitulated, then all of those soldiers would come to the Pacific, and then our Marines would have to fight them. So that inspired me to, learn about it. But I was sitting there in the ER that night and I said, I want to share all this knowledge with people, but I just don't have time to write a nonfiction book. I don't have time to do the research, interview the veterans, go to China. I've got kids. I'm in this busy residency. And then I thought, well, what if I wrote a novel? I could dream up an interesting story. I've watched a lot of war movies, possibly every war movie. And I thought, what if I just use that as a way to share this love of history that I have with people? And so that's what I did. I basically wrote a novel called Two Sons of China. I wrote it, it took a lot of years, and I got a book agent. And that was very nice. And it was great that this book came out about 10 years ago. And then, you know, when you have a book agent, you suddenly spend all your time thinking, what else could I write about? You know, because now I have something very valuable. I have access to publishers and to editors. And I was a very historically minded ophthalmology resident. I knew all these stories about incredible unsung heroes who had basically sacrificed a lot, persevered, and a lot of their inventions had come from military things like World War II. And I remember going to my agent and I said, I've got it. I've got a great idea for my next book. Are you ready? I was on the phone with her. And I said, I want to write a book about ophthalmology's heroes. And there was like complete silence. Like I was waiting for that's a great idea. But she was very tactful. She's very good at being tactful. And she basically said, I don't think that's going to work. I said, why not? And she said, you know, I just don't think the general public's that interested in learning about ophthalmological history. And I was crestfallen. But I kind of knew she was right, of course. She doesn't want to waste her time trying to pitch a book that's not going to sell well. I shouldn't waste my time writing a book that's not going to be successful. But I didn't want to give up on these stories. They were so gripping. And I said to myself, what could I do to make it more marketable? And I thought, well, what if I blended the history with my own story as a surgeon in training, trying to show people what it's like to be in the operating room, trying to save someone's sight, or perhaps more interestingly, what it's like when you're up against a tough complication and you just don't know exactly what to do next, or there's no good options. And there's many surgeons in this room that know what I'm talking about. And I think that honesty about what it's like to be a surgeon is what made this book become successful. It's called Saving Sight. It actually has filled kind of a niche in the sense that even though I wrote it second, it got a book deal much quicker and it came out before my novel did. And ever since this book came out, people were saying to me, you know, you should do that for all of medicine. You should just write about all the great unsung heroes of all the different fields. And I thought immediately that was going to be a great idea. But along the way, just as an aside, I was really passionate about this other great American story, which was about the Japanese Americans who fought with incredible valor in Europe during World War II, while many of them had families incarcerated in camps unjustly, like Manzanar, at home. And I wrote a novel called Repentance about that. And that came out in 2019. Fast forward to the pandemic, I finally had time to do a lot more reading. And I said, let's read about some other fields. And I have to admit, I was a very arrogant ophthalmologist. I thought all the best fields of this, like stories of discovery and serendipity and perseverance, were ophthalmological stories. But I was reading about cardiology and like these incredible surgeons who were operating on beating hearts, and Werner Forsman, who decides I can catheterize my own heart and risk my own life to do that. And he does that. And I was blown away. And then I read about the discovery of insulin and how these 4 Canadian co-discoverers hated each other so much that when one of them heard he was going to get the Nobel Prize, he almost refused it because he was so incensed that this co-discoverer of his was also going to get it because he hated him so much and thought his like contribution to so much outshine this other guy's. And I was hooked. I realized that medical history is drama. It's basically fallible humans trying to do things, but they're just as susceptible of all the base and bad instincts that we have, including jealousy, envy, self-interest, and I was hooked. And that became the Master of Medicine. So tonight, I'd love to share with you a couple of great stories about the intersection of World War II and medicine. You see, you know, this adage is one that I love. The only winner in war is medicine. I'm hoping one day to write a book with this as the title, to be honest. And it's so true, right? Tonight, I want to talk to you about how an operation on D-Day basically helped inaugurate the field of cardiac surgery. Therapy. So, are you ready? Let's begin. So, this first story is about the heart. My dad was a cardiologist. I love the heart. I learned about it very young. It wasn't really an option for me. I probably would have become a cardiologist, except I really didn't want to work quite as hard as my dad did. So the heart is fascinating. And if you think about it, even to a layman, not a room full of physicians like this is, it's easy to understand why how could you possibly access it? How could you sew it when it's moving so fast? You basically can't, right? And only a truly desperate situation would ever compel anyone to consider operating on a beating heart. Well, enter World War II. As you can imagine, this war produced a plethora of gruesome injuries that civilian doctors had never experienced in civilian life. So I want to first tell you about this person who is very important to the history of the Boston Medical Library. His name is Dwight Harkin. He was from Iowa, so he's a fellow Midwesterner. I'm from Illinois. I knew I would like him when I started reading about him. He trained at Harvard, and he was stationed at a army hospital just south of London, okay? And he sometimes encountered these soldiers whose chests had been blown apart by grievous wounds from shrapnel or bomb blasts. And amazingly, some of them had pieces of metal that had punctured their heart walls, and the metal was stuck in the hole, like plugging the hole. So these men were not acutely about to die, but they were languishing and close to death. They would die from either slow exsanguination or blood clots from the metal, metal foreign bodies in the bloodstream. So Harkin knew he wanted to try something to help these guys, but he knew what would happen if he pulled out one of the pieces of metal. There'd be like incredible geyser of blood. It's under pressure. All of us know that when you're operating the heart, you're basically deep in a hole, and it's very easy and quick for uncontrolled bleeding to fill that hole, and the surgeon would basically find himself operating a pool of blood with no visibility. So he knew if he was ever going to possibly find a way to operate on the heart, he'd have to have some very novel new idea. Well, on D-Day, June 6, 1944, he was able to try a new method. This horribly wounded soldier came into him with almost this exact same scenario. A piece of metal that punctured his heart, the metal was plugging the wound, and he was languishing. So he had a new idea. He said, I'm going to try to pull out the metal and immediately plug the hole with my finger. It's kind of rudimentary, but it's very understandable. And then maybe that will give me the precious seconds I need to put 2 or 3 sutures in there and close the wound. All right. This was crazy, right? Very, very difficult to sew a beating heart, but he tried to do it. He decided to proceed. So in this patient, he opened the chest, he spread the ribs, he entered the pericardial sac. He could see the piece of metal bobbing up and down with every heartbeat. And he grasps the metal with the clamp, pulls it out, and immediately plugs the hole with his finger, So imagine the tension at this moment. It can't really compare with Harkin's first ever try at this, but I can tell you as a surgeon, there are times when I'm, sitting there with a lot of stress and bordering on panic. It's usually happening when I'm trying to fix a retinal detachment and the visibility is poor because the cornea is getting hazy and I got to start working much quicker. But the problem is I can't see what I'm doing, so it's hard to work quicker. Or when I'm trying to fish a dislocated intraocular lens that's fallen to the back of the eye, out from the back of the eye, but it's lying on the retina, and you really don't want to risk touching the retina or damaging the retina. And those are times when my heart is racing and it's quite nerve-wracking. So I am sure Dwight Harkin had sweat dripping down his brow when he had his finger in the soldier's heart. But amazingly, it seemed to work. He stemmed the blood and he was able to pass one suture, then another suture. And the only moment of dismay occurred when the third suture went through the finger of his glove and he realized he was sutured to the beating heart. We know this because he wrote a letter to his wife telling the story. So he cut himself free, and amazingly, the operation was a success and the soldier survived. Incredible. This was actually the first premeditated open heart, beating heart surgery. Well, this is a smart guy, He decides, what can I do to make it better? Well, he says to himself, what if I pre-place a purse string of suture around the metal so that immediately when I pull it out, I can just pull on the string and it's closed right away. Pretty smart, right? We're just getting started. This guy, because of his innovative tactics, managed to remove metal fragments from the hearts of over a dozen soldiers during the war. Only because of World War II and the number of soldiers with his unique manner of cardiac injury could Harkin have devised, practiced, and improved his new technique. So now I'm going to tell you how this development helped all of us. Fast forward to after the war, and as you know, one of the most common heart disease problems of the era was mitral stenosis, which stemmed from rheumatic fever. So this is before antibiotics, of course, so kids would get rheumatic fever, they'd be sick, then they'd recover. But the inflammation would, of course, cause problems with their heart valves, with vegetations, fibrosis, and the mitral valve in particular would be a common issue. The job, of course, of the mitral valve is to let all the blood flow from the left atrium and the left ventricle so that the left atrium is fully emptied. And then, of course, it must slam shut so that all of the blood ejected from the left ventricle goes out the aorta and none of it goes backwards back into the left ventricle. But the problem, of course, was that in mitral stenosis, there was this bottleneck which prevented the left atrium from fully emptying. So the blood would get backed up in the lungs, and then you'd have congestion, people can't breathe, they are coughing up blood all the time. This would be killing people in the prime of their lives, in their 20s and 30s, and it was a death sentence. So two incredibly talented rival surgeons wanted to find a way to help these poor patients. One of them, of course, was Dwight Harkin. But I first want to tell you about another person named Charles Bailey. He was an Army vet as well from Philadelphia. And Bailey was a truly arrogant maverick. He was the epitome of arrogance. Everybody knew it. He felt he was like the most important person in the hospital, in the city, in the country. He was supremely confident, and he wanted to take Harkin's ideas much further to help these patients. It went like this. His plan was to pre-place a ring of sutures in the left atrium above the mitral valve, make an intentional incision in the middle of the purse string, stick his finger in the heart. So far, you're familiar with this. But what can he do with his finger in the heart? What can any of us do with our finger? We can poke, right? Like this. So he's thinking, what if I blindly poke my finger through the mitral valve orifice, ring it around, try and feel and loosen the leaflets that have become fibrosed together? Maybe that'll be a way of helping these people. The risks were enormous and largely unknown. How would he know, how hard to poke? What if his finger upset the heart rhythm and caused ventricular fibrillation and death? All of these things were probably going to happen, they thought. But he knew that if he didn't try, they were all going to die. So this is an example of what he's trying to do, an illustration where he has his finger in the left atrium, his finger is going through the mitral valve, there's a suture around his finger, there's like a little tube so that the suture is going in the same vector. You can just tighten it around the finger to limit blood loss. But of course, it's nothing like this. You can't cut away the heart and see what you're doing on the inside. You certainly can't see any of this. It's full of blood. Blood is oozing out everywhere. Well, he's a very confident surgeon. He's going to try this. So in November 1945, this is after World War II now, he decides to take this 37-year-old man named Walter Stockton to the operating room. Stockton's mitral stenosis was so bad, he couldn't even walk to the end of his driveway to pick up his newspaper, okay? Bailey opens his chest, spreads the ribs, accesses the heart. He places the purse string suture, makes his incision, and sticks his finger in the heart. Then he tries to tighten the suture around his finger to limit blood loss. But the suture tears through the heart muscle, which does not hold. And in one hand, his finger's in the heart, and his other hand, he's holding a string. And blood is gushing everywhere. And in minutes, the heart goes still. The patient dies. He'd failed even before he even got a chance to try the finger thing in the heart, okay? Well, he's not deterred. He's a very confident doctor. He tries again in another patient, and this time he gets his finger in the heart, rings it around, and amazingly, the patient survives the surgery, only to die within 48 hours. For these two deaths, the chief of cardiology at Hahnemann Hospital tells him, "We're revoking your privileges. It is my Christian duty not to permit you to perform any more such homicidal operations." To this, he retorts, "It is my Christian duty to perfect this operation. Nothing could be worse than what mitral stenosis does to people." He next takes his operation to nearby Wilmington Memorial Hospital in Delaware. Wrong. He realizes he's been a little too forceful. He's basically damaged the mitral valve leaflets, ripped them, and if you can believe it, has actually managed to make mitral stenosis worse by converting it to mitral insufficiency. This patient also dies, okay? So now he's 0 for 3, and behind his back, people are calling him the butcher. So at this point, I can tell you that the surgeon who continues on this tack is either supremely arrogant or believes so strongly in what they're doing that they will endure ridicule and failure to see it done. And as a surgeon myself, I can tell you, there are times when I've tried Hail Mary surgeries. Usually these are in eyes that are going blind or already legally blind, so it's almost like you have nothing to lose. But I've never, maybe only in like moments of complete improvisation where there's there's something you've tried that's never been done. I have certainly never done a premeditated surgery for a technique that's never been done, and certainly anything all my peers think is insane, right? To do that, I have to be a genius or a madman. I don't think I'm either, but let's hope Charles Bailey is a genius because he is not giving up, okay? He still has operating privileges at 2 hospitals, Philadelphia General and Episcopal Hospital. And this is how his mind works, okay? He knows that word of his failures is spreading. He's worried he's only gonna have one more chance at this surgery. So he says to himself, I'm gonna maximize my chance of success. I'm gonna schedule one operation in the morning at Philadelphia General and the next one at Episcopal in the afternoon. So that if my patient in the morning dies, I can jet across town and start the second operation before people find out and they stop me, okay? I don't think anyone in this, I don't care how old you are, I don't think any of us can imagine truly risking our careers in this way. So this is what he tries to do. His first patient at Philadelphia General dies on the table. He's 0 for 4. So no doubt, feeling the stress and gravity of the moment, he decides to drive across town to Episcopal Hospital. And there he's gonna operate on a young housewife named Constance Warner. This woman's heart disease is so bad, she can't care for her young child. So Bailey takes her to the operating room and gets into her heart, and it seems to go well. He feels like it's good. There isn't any major hemorrhaging. He closes up. She survives the surgery. Excellent. The next day, he sees her in the hospital. And he thinks to himself, wait, is she breathing a little better? Maybe. The next day, she's definitely breathing a little better. By the 4th day, she's out of bed and walking. It worked. Amazing. Bailey is elated. His reputation is instantly resurrected. Okay, he's shouting it from the rooftops, I'm the greatest. He even takes this patient on a 1,000-mile train ride to Chicago to parade her in front of the stage at a big medical meeting, okay? So Bailey is a hero now. But meanwhile, I didn't tell you what Dwight Harkin's been up to. He's been trying the same thing many times in Boston, okay? He has his first successful case 6 days after Bailey's first successful case. Before that one, though, he's tried it on 6 patients, and all 6 have died. At this point, the worldwide success rate of this operation is 2 out of 12. After the death of one of those patients, Harkin returns home despondent. That night, he hears a knock at his door. The caller is a woman he's never met. The woman passes him a sealed letter. The letter is from the patient who died that day. She wrote it before the operation and told her friend to deliver it if she didn't survive. You can imagine his hands were probably trembling when he opens his letter, or at least wondering what is going to be in it. The letter said, "Dear Dr. Harkin, thanks for the chance. A small portion of my estate has been left to see that this doesn't happen again." Can you imagine receiving a note like that? Like, I hope to God I never do. But can you imagine writing a letter like that as a patient, knowing you're going into a surgery that has never successfully been performed in the history of the world? And I think that that obviously illustrates the sense of desperation and courage inherent to this endeavor. Dwight Harkin and Charles Bailey inaugurated cardiac surgery because they showed that the heart could be a viable surgical target. Once people realized that, everyone started working on it. Within 10 years, you had the heart-lung machine, which basically allowed us to stop the heart for proper operations. Within less than a decade after that, the first CABG surgery, and shortly thereafter, the first heart transplant. Amazing, you know, in a matter of 20 years. And so this is a picture of Charles Bailey on the cover of Time magazine in 1957. When I tell this story, this is a very select group of an audience for this. You guys are, you know, preaching to the choir here, but most times no one has ever heard of either of these physicians. And when you think about how much attention we pay in this society to professional athletes, to pop stars, how much more do people like these deserve to be remembered? And that is my main motivation to exploring their stories and sharing them with other people. So that is just an unforgettable story that I think that this medical library should be very proud to have Dr. Harkin's papers and all of his memorabilia and things like that. So we still only have time to tell you another of my favorite stories, which is coming from Italy in World War II, okay? So this story starts with the Allied invasion in 1943. So just to set the stage, you remember that the Allies invaded North Africa first, and they invaded Sicily, and they're trying to get into the soft underbelly of Europe, and they invade Italy in September of 1943. And to their delight, the Italians immediately surrendered. But to their disappointment, the Italians and German allies did not really want to give up so easily. And they fought very, very hard to hold their ground. They had a very strong defensive line across the peninsula south of Rome. Okay. And so the idea for the allies was to basically rush as many men and supplies into southern Italy to strengthen their toehold. And we're going to talk about the port of Bari here in the southwestern part of the country. Now, this is a very special port, okay? It has an impressive mile-long jetty that serves as like a breakwater and a pier, but there's only a very small opening, okay? So in December of 1943, this harbor was packed with ships, okay? We're talking Liberty ships, ammunition, full of ammunition, supplies, oil tankers, patrol torpedo boats, lots of smaller craft. It was so crowded, the ship hulls were touching. And if you were a cargo ship, you might have to wait 5 days before you get a chance to unload your cargo, okay? So because, speed was of the essence, the British just stopped doing their normal blackout orders. They were very confident the Luftwaffe was very depleted. They thought the chance of an enemy air attack was extremely remote. At the time, so you can get an idea of what that looked like. And he summoned every available German bomber from northern Italy to attack the port. 105 planes heeded the call. The attack commenced at 7:25 p.m. and lasted only 20 minutes. Rarely has a fleet of ships ever been caught so undefended and unprepared. German bombs set off multiple series of explosions amongst the closely anchored ships that were, of course, laden with fuel and ammunition. Men were leaping from burning ships into the frigid Adriatic waters. Some were like rescued, freezing cold, covered with oil. The total number of dead, counting both soldiers and civilians, exceeded over 1,000. In all, 17 ships were sunk. In the Army, they started calling this attack the second Pearl Harbor. I have a 1-minute newsreel video, which I thought you would enjoy, just to kind of give you a sense of what it was like.
Sensor clearance now releases these pictures of a damaging raid made by enemy aircraft on the port of Bari on the Italian Adriatic coast. A low-level night attack which claimed 1,000 casualties. The heavy death toll was caused by the explosion of 2 ammunition ships hit by German bombs. In all, 17 Allied ships were Most of the shipping, whose cargo was to supply the 8th Army, was destroyed by 2 separate blasts from the exploding ammunition ships. Some of the vessels remained burning for a week. The disaster precipitated an immediate inquiry into the ineffective defenses covering the port.
All right, so the music, of course, makes it very dramatic, but that kind of gives you an idea of what had happened. Great. So the port was out of action for 3 months. The Allies had suffered an unmitigated disaster. It would be very hard to imagine conditions or the situation being any worse than this. But amazingly, it did. Even in the midst of the attack, wounded soldiers and civilians running for cover noticed something very peculiar. It was a smell, an aroma that like hung in the air over the harbor. And it was like the smell of garlic or maybe mustard. And this, nobody really knew what to make of it, okay? And the reason was top secret. Inside a Liberty ship that looked like this, it was the Liberty ship I'm talking about was called the John Harvey. There was a secret cargo of 2,000 American mustard gas bombs, each weighing about 60 or 70 pounds. An explosion on the John Harvey sent the poison aerosolized into the air or in liquid form into the harbor, where it mixed with viscous oil and coated all of these sailors swinging for their lives. And a poisonous cloud kind of wafted over the city of Bari. Because hospitals were inundated with really severely injured people, they didn't really pay that much attention to the people who were just wet and tired and were just waiting essentially for someone to tell them where to go. These soldiers were basically wrapped in wet blankets and just told to wait. If people had known that they were coated in toxic fluid, they would have been told to strip and shower immediately. But they didn't know that. And in all, 628 military personnel were hospitalized, with mustard gas poisoning, with symptoms ranging from extensive chemical burns and blisters to severe conjunctivitis and temporary blindness. In a month, 83 of them would die. And if you're like me, when you first hear the story, you're like, why did we have mustard gas there? We're the good guys, right? Well, it turns out the Geneva Convention banned the use of poison gas in war, but it did not ban the possession of poison gas. And so the American mustard gas had purportedly been brought to Europe to have in case the Germans used chemical weapons, so we'd be able to retaliate. But isn't it ironic now, because now they're driven by the fear that word's going to get out that they had mustard gas bombs, and that the Germans might then feel like they are justified in attacking the Allies with chemicals. So they decided, obviously, let's just cover it up. So they made it a big secret. But there was an army physician named Stuart Alexander who was called to investigate these mysterious findings that these soldiers were having. And he was a very smart guy. He said he didn't know about the mustard gas bombs, but he realized that only chemical weapons could cause this constellation of findings in his patients. And when an intact American mustard gas bomb was brought up from the bottom of the harbor, he was proven correct. And absolutely, it confirmed that it wasn't a German chemical attack. So he also noticed something very important. This, by the way, is just one page from his top secret, medical report back to the Army, the War Department. He noticed that the surviving mustard gas victims had very low white blood cell counts. Okay, so it wasn't like 4,500 to 11,000. It was like some of these guys had counts less than 100. So he correctly deduced that mustard gas had harmed patients' bone marrow, where the white blood cells are being made. And this made him wonder if the chemical could be used to help treat cancers related to white blood cell overproduction. He thought, if mustard could do this, what could it do for a person with leukemia or lymphosarcoma? You see, mustard gas's effects on bone marrow had been pretty much ignored during World War I and little studied, but now the Bari incident had bestowed scientists with a very large case series of human subjects that had been exposed to the toxic chemicals so they could carefully study it. Back in the US, Alexander's work was noticed by Colonel Cornelius Rhodes, who was the chief of the medical division of the Chemical Warfare Service. And in 1944, Rhodes organized a classified clinical trial of 160 cancer patients who were treated with nitrogen mustard, a derivative of the chemical used in mustard gas. The study showed positive results with lymphoma, and in 1949, the first cancer chemotherapy to be approved by the FDA was a form a situation, oncology has made a huge leaps and bounds. We're talking about immunotherapy today. But even today, chemotherapy is a mainstay of treatment for solid tumors. And it all started with this catastrophic disaster at Bari. This was the first time they were able to treat cancer wherever it went. Before this, it was only localized tumors that could be treated with surgery. If you're lucky, something superficial, it might be treated with rudimentary radiation. But now you could treat metastases and blood cancers, all because of this terrible event that had some serendipity associated with it. So just to wrap up, what can we learn from World War II in medicine? Well, first, necessity is the mother of invention. Without World War II, Dwight Harkin, of course, would never have been confronted with the heart wounds that allowed him to experiment or launch the field of cardiac surgery. We need mavericks like Charles Bailey, even though they're terribly arrogant, to basically take chances and risk their reputations to make breakthroughs that everyone else thinks is impossible. And finally, we see that even when humanity is at its worst, when in the midst of a catastrophic disaster like a world war where tens of millions die, there are still extraordinary examples of human compassion and diligence exemplified by doctors like Stuart Alexander, who serve as role models to us and inspire us to just do our very best in whatever community, workplace, or a group of people or institution like the Boston Medical Library that we possibly can. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your attention. Happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb. We do have some time for questions. We can take them from online or in person. Anybody have an in-person question now?
Did anyone know Dwight Harkin? Wow, we have many. Can we hear some stories? Mhm. Wow. Why did he have to, he had to feel it? Oh my God.
Who did?
Sorry. That's amazing. Yeah.
Some of us drew blood without gloves.
Yes.
Dave?
Yep. Go ahead.
Deeb?
I actually met him once. First, he was the most arrogant person I've ever
Oh. Maybe it was a requirement.
The second thing, and I don't know how this fits in with your story, is that I saw a movie of him going to Congress when there was anti-vivisectionists that had been telling the world that we should not do any studies,
Animal studies.
animal studies. And what he did, he turned around and got up in front of Congress, and he turned around and had a guy bring in a poster, and the poster was that they took 10 dogs and shot them in the chest, and they operated on them, and only 2 survived. Then the guy walked out. Then he came back, and out of the next group, 8 survived. Then he goes back and comes back. The guy carrying the poster has nothing in front of him. He said he was shot in the chest in Korea, and he survived. And then everybody, the veterans, started clapping.
Wow.
And they threw the anti-vivisection. By the way, just my own experience, not too long ago, we do, in the cath lab, we do this operation using a catheter.
Yes.
For mitral stenosis. And I'll give my personal, most terrified time. I was one of the first people in Boston to do this. And I had a patient, a woman that was pregnant. And she went to another institution which had very bad mitral stenosis. And they said, if you have an operation, you're going to lose the baby. And she heard that we had started. I lose the baby? And this, I don't see why, because you're not going to, it's going to be just a transcatheter thing. And I never sweat more in my career than fearing that something would go wrong, and not only the patient would die, the baby would die.
Yeah. Wow.
So
That's
I
terrifying.
go back now to last year. I'm in the clinic, and a woman comes up to me and says, and she had a young woman with her, and she goes, "This is the second time you'll be meeting my daughter."
Wow.
And like I said,
That's amazing.
I can't freaking believe that we saved the daughter, and now I'm meeting her. She's 17 years old. So
Yeah. That story's enough to make everyone want to be a doctor, right? That's great.
Noel, do we have any questions online? Any other questions?
Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb. And thank you all for coming. Please do consider becoming a fellow of the Boston Medical Library or giving us financial support. That's an appropriate question at this kind of event. Thank you. Good night.